Brands are built through relationships. But what do those relationships require? In this interview with Bryony Simpson, the founder and CEO of WePioneer, a branding agency, we cover how the brand is in the people and their essence and what words they put to it, how to not move further away from the customer as you grow, what the world of AI and data has changed about how we build brands, how it's not all about words, but communicating through actions and on the layers deeper than words. I came across WePioneer through this incredible report they did called Human Connection, the beating heart of resilient brands. So I'd definitely go and check that out before listening to this if you can. But otherwise, please enjoy this fabulous conversation with the one and only Bryony Simpson.
The simple fact that we would not be as successful as we are on Earth today if we weren't able to connect with others. If you've ever read Sapiens, and that was there's so much in that book, but that was the thing that really stuck with me. Everyone always thinks that it's our ability to use tools that made us be able to beat the Neanderthals. But it was actually our ability to communicate and come together with others and form connections, negotiate, communicate. That's what got us to where we are. It wasn't brute force, and it's incredibly powerful. And we forget. We don't. And so many people don't even know that. And I think that as well is something that we need to hold dear to ourselves and put at the center of our lives if we're going to be successful humans.
Which is exactly what you've done, and you are living this truth, which led to this incredible report that you put out with your company, WePioneer, called Human Connection, the beating heart of resilient brands. So can you talk to how that came about and why you created this report?
I've been in the industry for a long time, 20 odd years now. And
which industry?
Brand and design industry. And it's a space I love, I think, in large part because it probably taps into the kind of the creative and the rational sides of my brain. But I think on my journey, along the way, I've sort of picked up what I feel is perhaps broken about the industry. A lot of people talk about the industry being broken for one reason or another, and I don't, it's sort of, I think it's struggling to keep up in a lot of ways. And I think one of the biggest challenges we face as an industry is forgetting the simple truth that brands are built through relationships, and you don't buy or you don't feel any sense of loyalty to a brand, or you don't love that brand. Like, we all have those brands we evangelize about, however rational a human being we think we are. We all have those brands which, we go to. And that's built through connection in many different ways. And so we put the report together to kind of remind us all why we're doing this, why it matters. And actually on a greater level than that, one of the sort of the bandwagons I'm on quite frequently is the amount of waste in the industry, the waste in terms of wasted attention, wasted money, and all of the rubbish that comes with that. You can dig into the amount of plastic that's created as a result, et cetera, things people don't need. And I think the very kind of discipline, if you like, of when you're building brands, of reminding yourself what the relationship is that you're trying to build with the person you're in the relationship with. Yes, the customer probably, but it could be your employee, it could be other stakeholders as well. Reminding yourself what you're trying to do there reduces the amount of sort of waste in terms of money poorly spent, or or time poorly spent from people who are just being, people. We all know we don't want to see ads that that aren't relevant to us, or even that just get annoying. It's all of that stuff. We just thought about it better. We'd build stronger relationships with better businesses, and we'd actually create real value for people's lives. Like we want brands in our lives, but we want them there if they're going to help us. And I think the shift, that we've seen over the last 20 odd years in terms of the rise of social media, and we all know that the relationship between brands and customers is a symbiotic relationship now. It's a two-way relationship. Then we as brands, or brand owners and brand builders, need to tap into that and recognize the new rules of play. I think one of the toughest things we've seen recently is the state of the world today. I think we all know that it's in flux, and there are so many different pressures on all of us. And I think it's put that relationship under extreme pressure. And I think both sides are acting out of panic in some cases, both the consumer and the brands themselves. Everyone's doing, crazy things. Like, brands are acting crazy ways. Consumers are much more emotional than they perhaps were before. Customer service lines are getting calls that are much more, I wouldn't say aggressive, but certainly emotional. And, we hear that firsthand through conversations that we've had through in the report. Consumers want brands to look after them, and brands are panicking about their own pressures, rising cost of goods, supply chain issues, shareholder pressures, all of that good stuff. And it's forcing them to make irrational decisions, or at least what they believe are rational decisions, but it's actually harming the relationship as a result. So the report is a bit of a kind of come to Jesus of, hang on a minute, I know we're all stressed, but what is it we're trying to do here? And let's get back to basics, if you like. One of the mantras, if you like, to what I believe and the work that we do is kind of taking it back to the very simple idea of the human relationship, human couplings, if you like, and that can be romantic or platonic. But a successful relationship is built on some quite fundamental principles that we all know. If any of us have ever had a successful relationship with anybody else, which I'd like to think we all have in some way, shape, or form, then we know and understand that that relationship has to be built on an understanding of who you are yourself. You have to know yourself. You have to know the other person and take the time to get to know them. And then you invest in each other. You invest in moments with each other where you can demonstrate that understanding and they reciprocate. And you get to a certain place at the end of the day where if you're investing in that relationship, you're learning from that relationship and you're growing together, then you get to a point of loyalty. You get to a point of where you will die on a sword for that other person. And, that may sound dramatic when it comes to brands, but there are those brands where we will evangelize about them. They don't come to us and say, give us 5 stars on our Trustpilot. You will freely be going out your day going, oh, you've got to try so-and-so. They're amazing. You know what they did last time? Blah, 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 blah. Or those brands that you've loved, all of your life because they've always delivered on what it means to you, to be in relationship with that brand. That's loyalty, which is the holy grail when it comes to brand building. But we like to talk more about resilience because of all of that, all that brings for brands, commercially and otherwise. But it's also, what I love about it is that it's not just benefiting the brand, it's benefiting the other party as well. I'm getting something out of this. I feel like somebody's actually investing in me as well. And you get that with the brands that do it right.
Could we go into the details of this with what do the core truths of relationship building look like in practice between the brand and the consumer?
It's really simple. I mean, I'm a huge believer in simplicity. There's so much jargon out there. but and I also think that it's like, if you boil it down to its simplest form, then everybody can grasp it. To the junior marketing exec, to the customer services rep, to the guy, on the ops desk, whatever it may be. What are we trying to do here? And so the principles have to be around knowing yourself as a brand, and that's knowing yourself in a really true way. It's spending time kind of understanding how you've got here, what you believe in, what may or may not be driving you. Like, some brands should have a purpose, some arguably shouldn't, because there's just, I think there's an argument to say that shampoo, does it really need a purpose? That's another discussion for another day. But understanding and being able to articulate who you are in a way that is simple and very much true. And part and parcel of that is also understanding who you want to be in a relationship with, who your ideal person is. And we make the mistake of talking a lot about demographics. It's, this age person, living in this kind of area with this kind of job. Yes, that helps to a certain extent to put some guardrails in place. The most important thing about that is a more psychographic profile, starting to talk about mindset, starting to talk about interests. And that actually, if you do it right, can open yourself up to a diverse perspective on who that person actually is, rather than kind of putting them in a really restrictive box. So understanding yourself, understanding the other person, investing in that other person, that's what you get into the power of really effective research. Research in this industry is a scary word because it always sounds expensive. And it's not about, big kind of endless focus groups or something. It's about a cultural piece. It's about people within the business spending time sort of thinking customer first, being their eyes open, really understanding the dynamics of what people want, the people that you're in a relationship with. And then the third sort of step, if you like, is, as I say, investing in that relationship throughout the journey that they have with you, throughout the experience. And that's a meandering experience, right? And it starts with getting on their radar through comms and advertising, right through to hopefully the holy grail of them going out there and evangelizing about you, if you got it right? And all of those steps in between, taking time to think about the needs of that other person, and ideally you're also trying to move beyond that. You're trying to give them things which they don't even know they want yet, and that can be as simple as as a UX experience. And a beautifully designed UX experience shouldn't just meet your needs; it should actually exceed them in the sense of helping you in a way you didn't even know you needed yet, right? And then I think the fourth dimension to that is growing together, continuing to invest and understand the other person, listening and taking that feedback on board, and then improving as a result. And the kind of tenets across all of that have to be transparency, in the way you interact with that person. Authenticity is an overused word, but there's always a reason why it's overused. It's because it's actually incredibly important these days. And it's going back to that point at the beginning about knowing yourself. And yes, you can know yourself, but you've got to be authentic in the way you engage with others. And it's taking that across the journey of your relationship with that other party in everything you do. And it's interesting because within the report, there's a stat around 50% of consumers that we spoke to about 400 consumers, 50% of them wanted a more positive experience over and above personalized communications, over and above shared values, all these things which we as marketers think is the thing that's going to, is going to win them over. Or personalize my communications, that's going to make them feel loved. It's not about that. It's about the experience. And it's about making sure the experience is meaningful to them and giving them value at every step of the way.
Quick 25-second pause to talk about how startup leaders are athletes of the mind. And just like an athlete, you should treat your health as your number one priority. You can't show up for others if you're depleted. You can't pour from an empty cup, which is why my friend Dan's company, Heights, is a partner of the show. Heights are the world's best brain and gut supplements. I've been taking Heights for a couple of years and I feel like an elite mental athlete. It's a bit of a no-brainer. Click on the link in the description and start reaching your heights. Right, back to the episode. So to recap, we have knowing ourselves, knowing the other person, investing in the relationship, and then the last one was growing together.
Growing together.
And on top of these 4 steps, there are sort of values or principles which live throughout, of which you have authenticity, transparency, empathy.
Yeah, I mean, they speak to the same truth, right? Authenticity, transparency, and empathy. And I think it's about ensuring that the way you're behaving, so to speak, is one that represents how you'd want to behave in any relationship you were in. And everybody knows that a relationship that's not built on trust is not a particularly successful one.
And so what does building a relationship on trust between a brand and consumer actually look like? Is it just a matter of these 4 steps being executed with these 3 values in mind? Or is there something else?
A relationship built on trust between a brand and whoever they're in a relationship with has to be one delivering on your promises. And one of the sort of golden rules to building successful brands is don't break a promise. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have right now, that we've always had, but I think we have right now in the industry, is there are two camps of brands. There are brands that are out there doing an incredible job of making and delivering on promises. And a lot of that comes through in the sort of on the brilliant startups that we have in this world. Starling Bank is one that I personally evangelize a lot about. And I think with a brand like that and a number of them as well, they focus on getting the experience right. And I think a lot of it actually comes from tech culture, and brilliant tech products are built on understanding the use of that product and iterating so you make sure it's really, really powerful. And that maybe or maybe not has fueled a culture where focus on getting the experience right and then think about making the promises afterwards, if you like. You have another camp which is much more focused on making these promises out in the world through communications, advertising, which grabs attention, which is fine. Like, grab attention, really, really zone in on the needs of the people that you want and deliver them what they want, be it making them smile or making them laugh or catching their attention in some other way. But then don't leave them hanging high and dry. Like, don't then not deliver on that through the experience, because that's just wasted money, and that's just wasted attention. That's ridiculous. There's this short-termism, I think, a lot of times, and so to build trust, and some of those trusted brands out there at the moment are those that are focused on investing in the experience across all facets, be it, as I say, the tech experience, the online experience, the human component, like calling up the customer service center or someone being, in the store, for example, looking after you, the physical experience, all of those notes, they should all be built and crafted around the needs of the customer at that point. And, and not go down the sort of route of quick returns by getting out there, grabbing attention. And yeah, you may get a few sales, you may get loads of sales, but are you really going to keep those people necessarily if you can't follow through? And it's got to be about not breaking promises, taking action, actually delivering on what you say you're going to do. Simple. What we would all do.
And it feels like the difference between the brands that focus on this versus not is a short run versus long run mindset.
Yeah. Sustainable brands with a small s is something else that I feel really strongly about. Is brands that have a place in the world and look after that place in the world. Probably it comes from what I was saying right at the beginning in terms of human beings and our place in the world and reconnecting with why we're here and our responsibility around that. And I think it probably reflects that as well, which is, we all have responsibility. Brands have a responsibility, and therefore, when we're building our brands, focusing on, to your point, the long-term relationship rather than the short-term gains. And yes, you will get, you will hopefully get some short-term gains. You will get people coming to try you out, but you want to keep them because resilience, which we talk about in the report, is a flywheel. It's if you've got to a place where you've got enough people who are with you on this journey, they're gonna help you grow because they're gonna tell others about you. They're gonna tell them in such a way that it's infectious. But you're gonna keep them as well. So they're gonna stay with you and it's gonna multiply. It's the most, it's the holy grail when it comes to scalability. That's what you want. We all fight and try and keep customers, and then we try and acquire customers. But it's actually, if you just focus on really investing in the relationship with every customer that you gain, then you get the best of both worlds, if you like. And so, but that takes a shift in mindset. To your point, it's and we're not built. This world is not built for a long-term mindset. Everything from the way our stock markets are built to the way our political system runs is based on short-termism. We need to move beyond that for so many reasons right now.
So if you assume we have an audience who are founders thinking about their brands and they have maybe already made this mindset shift that they want to approach relationship building with a more long-term mindset, can we go into more practical breakdown of maybe some exercises that people can do at each stage of this journey? So we've got knowing self, knowing customer, investing in the relationship and growing together. So knowing self, when you work with clients, what's the immediate approach that you take with them?
With young companies and growing businesses, this is a really interesting exercise because it's not about kind of, when you work with larger organizations, more often than not, you're kind of going out there to try and create something. Quite ironically, quite often trying to create something from scratch, in the sense of it's not, you've got the business has got to a stage where it might have lost its way and you need to kind of go out there and regather, and you haven't got the kind of the strength within the organization already, within the people within the organization. So when it comes to sort of startups and scaling businesses, the brand is in the people more often than not. It's there, it's grown organically. And what we often find is they get to a certain stage of growth, they haven't had to touch the brand. When I say the brand, I'm not necessarily talking about the branding, as in the logo and the colors and, the aesthetic components or the visual and verbal components. So more about the very essence of who they are, what's quite often in the founder's head, and how they're building that company and through everything they do. So when you're looking at that first stage, working with a business of that sort of size, it's really about trying to get that out of the team. And quite often you'll get to a stage where they might have grown to a size where, because they haven't got anything down on paper, as you're bringing more people into the business, if they're further and further away from that core epicenter of vision and truth, then it's quite difficult for them to necessarily take that on board. So what we would do is work together with the, with certain people within the organization. And, quite often it's useful as part of that process to have the views of people that are perhaps a little bit further away from the core center of truth. Bring that in. Getting that down through quite a creative process in workshops and getting that to a single point of truth that is down on paper in some way, shape or form. And that's not necessarily something you would take out to the world in that respect, but it's putting a stake in the ground and going, right, this is what we are. And the most important thing about that is that it very much needs to be future proof. It can't just be about a moment in time. It is built through all of the rich equity that's come through the first years of growth. But it's got to also be looking ahead to, where do we want to go? What are the new markets we want to enter? Does it give us a stretch for that? What are the new audience groups we perhaps want to engage with? Does it give us a stretch for that? So quite often we have to be thinking ahead when it comes to the business and their ambitions, but bringing that together with the thought and the intent that quite often comes from that founding team.
So it sounds like it's having really strong clarity on the values, the vision, the purpose.
I don't like kind of focusing on one specific set of things, because I think every organization might want something, like needs something different. Quite often they need something different. So I like to talk about beliefs as well, for example. So structurally, it might well be some kind of vision or purpose. Why are we here in the world? If you know Simon Sinek, you'll know, he talks about why, how, what. That's one structure. Why are we here in the world? What are we trying to do? Why do we exist? What's driving us? That'll always be a thing that you might not necessarily ever achieve, but it's this thing that's keeping, driving you forward. What are we doing? What fundamentally are we doing? And why is it, how is it helping people? How is it benefiting people? And how are we doing it? What is our mode of operation? Like, how do we go about achieving that for people? And that, underpinned by values or beliefs, whatever you think is right for the organization, whatever people best engage with. And I think with all of this, it's got to come down to how the team feel most comfortable talking about it. That's how you structure it. That's how you put it down into some kind of organization, if you like, of how you get it down onto paper. It's like, how do we feel comfortable talking about this? What's the easiest way to talk about it? Why are we here? What our vision is? Whatever words you want to use, it's got to be about. It fundamentally comes down to who we are and the sort of the idea that we want to build in people's minds about who we are, and what makes us who we are.
Then going into who are our customers, how do you take a startup or company through that journey?
Startups and growing businesses generally always have a really good understanding of who they're in a relationship with. And chatting the other day with a growing hair care brand, and that was one of the first things I said. We know our customers really well because we're in, they're built on community, right? And and then that's incredible foundation. It's about, I think, quite often that's got you to where you are. So how do you perpetuate that? How do you continue to understand them and connect with them and understand where they're coming from at the end of the day? So when you're looking at getting to know them, then it really has to come down to continuing that sense of community, whatever structures you've got in place to get that feedback from people. If you don't have that, putting that in place, some kind of, be it panel is a sort of the wrong word, but some kind of community where you can ask questions. And if it's, if it's not a direct community, then, the way you communicate with them. So on your email, your email database, for example, I love a story that Oddbox, I think, did an incredible job recently where they were talking. They'd obviously been having conversations internally about the way they structured their delivery times and when they were sending them out and were they going to give people the option to choose their delivery days, which are always fixed, right? And this was a little while ago when the world was even more flux than it is today. And everyone, it felt like all brands were kind of making decisions for you. And then they just sent an email going, we're thinking of doing this. What do you think? Click these boxes, do this. Yeah, I didn't think it was a survey. It was super easy for someone who's, like we all are, short of time. And it was just asking me a question that I was like, what do you think about this? And it's the simple things like that. And that's what I think when it comes to understanding your customer, it's not one thing. It's about putting the mechanisms in place that you can get you can hold that conversation. You can have those back and forth with people through, some kind of panel, just email them directly, ask them a question, not asking them for sort of general feedback or asking them to give you 5 stars, going, we're thinking about this. What do you think? Because we want to make sure we got it right. Ethnographic research is a really powerful thing as well, depending on what industry you're in. If we work a lot in hospitality, and
do you mind defining what ethnographic research is?
Yeah, so sitting, watching people, and it doesn't need to be ethnographic in the most sophisticated form, where I think people go into people's houses and watch how they wash their hair and stuff. It can be a bit freaky. The principles of it, which is just spending time sitting. I mean, some of the best business owners, founders that have got to great heights will sit in, in their restaurants, in the hotels, wherever, if it's a sort of environment where that makes sense, just watch people watch. You hear about these stories of people who still do that, people, incredibly busy people. And it's about putting that culture in place within teams to be thinking outside in. I prefer outside in than customer first, because customer first is one of these things like, people roll their eyes, go, well, the customer's not always right. It's thinking outside in. It's thinking, what would I feel like if I was in their shoes? And goes back to what we touched on empathy before. And I think it's in recruitment, hiring people who are naturally empathetic, who sort of naturally put themselves in other people's shoes, because I think you get sort of a natural tendency for people to be thinking, therefore outside in, thinking about what the customer might need at this point, and acting accordingly. So to summarize, I think it's about maintaining, if you've got some kind of community and some kind of way of tapping into a core group of customers that you can have regular conversations with. It's about lines of exchange where possible, asking questions, being, again, really human about it, and just going, if I was wanting to know what someone thought about this, how would I do that? I'd probably pick up the phone and ask them, or I'd probably email them or whatever. Like you would just use your common sense. And then the final one, which has completely escaped me now.
Ethnographic research.
Sitting there, watching people, talking to them, asking them questions, noticing that, and then feeding it back.
is there a sort of hierarchy of types of research and communication that brands can have with customers that often deliver the most rich insights? Or is it the sort of insights you get from the community experience versus the insights you get from the email asking a question versus the insights you get from the ethnographic research, all just give you different types of understanding? Or is there more of like a focus groups actually tend to be a lot more rich of insights versus ethnographic research?
Yeah, and I think, well, yeah, I'll just put my hands up. I'm not a research specialist. We have, a partner that works with us on that, because there are there are different ways that you can dig into different issues. If you can set up research to do, to answer different questions for you. And if, a well-run focus group will do that. Like, does this new product do it for you or not, kind of type thing. And I think there is, there are the sort of short-term questions you may want to answer, for which a piece of research like that would be useful, versus the longer term education, constant growing together we're talking about, that those other kind of mechanisms will give you, in the sense that kind of back and forth communication through community, through asking questions via email, through having the culture where people within your teams are receiving email, your customer services team, where they're receiving emails and they're picking up the trends, and they're picking up that something's not quite right here, or actually I'm really seeing that this is coming up quite a lot. What is that? Taking that back into the business. That long-term stuff, that ongoing kind of learning and evolving stuff is the stuff which won't give you necessarily the answer to one question, but it'll gradually shape your view on how the customer needs are evolving, or perhaps how your customer experience therefore needs to evolve, in order to be able to meet those needs. Or perhaps it opens up opportunities for you to come up with new ideas, because that's the most wonderful thing. Actually, I'm seeing that people are really struggling at this point, or I really feel that that there is a gap here. Like, I don't know, if someone's coming to, say you've got a hotel brand or whatever, or a restaurant brand, and you're finding that people are hanging around quite a lot in this space, and why is that happening? And then if you've got the mechanisms in place internally where people can freely bring this feedback back without any agenda, just go, I'm noticing this, and there are the forums within the teams to go, that's really interesting, don't know what that means yet, but let's have somewhere to put that. And then you start to knit stuff together. And I think we get, the bigger we get, the further away we get from the customer. And that's where you get into big brands which feel miles away from what the customer actually really needs, and it takes a long time to get back to them. And that's why they end up acquiring all of these smaller startups, because they're like, guys get it so right, but they're close to the customer, but also it's about building in those ways of staying close to them and keeping them there. And I think that's the saddest part of growth, is the risk that comes with that, of getting further and further away from who you're doing this for in the first place. So finding ways to build that in to the way you do business, ways that are scalable, ways that are part of your culture, as you grow, is one of the most important things you can do. And then you don't need to spend huge amounts of money on focus groups and stuff like that to answer questions which you don't even know where to start answering, because you haven't spoken to your customers or had any connection with them in such a long time. Being like quite obtuse here and being quite sort of over the top, but that culture and those mechanisms in place are the most important thing.
So it sounds like we can build these consistent streams of communication which give us indications of consumers' needs changing. And the more tapped in we are to like hear that, then leads to us acting to become closer to what the customer needs and delivering what the customer needs. And I suppose the more disjointed those feedback loops are, that's like consistent, ongoing, as you said, like customer success or customer service teams, the more disjointed those feedback loops are, then we then have to sort of play catch up later on by investing more money in this other types of research.
Yeah. We have a huge opportunity when we're small to create those feedback loops. And companies today, generally speaking, do a very good job of it. The most important thing is how you keep hold of it. And because I think if you start to lose that, then that's where the trouble starts. And then you're in a constant game, as you say, of catch up, or you get into the space of trying to acquire customers very expensively. Some of the biggest brands in the world spend a lot of money on acquisition because they can. But do people really love those brands? Do people really love HSBC? Not really, but they spend a heck of a lot of money on advertising because you could argue that they've got so far away from what the customer actually needs. They've got so much cash in their pocket that they'll just throw that at the job and hope that it sticks. They could have saved themselves a lot of time and looked after customers a lot better if, as they've grown all of these years along the way, found ways and means to stay closer to the customer.
Is there a gold standard example of a large company that does this really well and has those strong feedback loops?
Good question. Yeah, I think, as I say, Lego for me is a brand that has a very strong brand. It's no coincidence that they are family owned and still to this day. And they're so connected with who they are trying to serve that it feeds back into how they position themselves, how they innovate, how they communicate, everything they do. And I don't know the ins and outs of how they work behind the scenes, but I can only imagine that they have, they invite kids regularly in to play with their toys, they watch, they learn, and it goes back into their innovation process, and it goes back into the way they talk about themselves and who they engage with. And you can see it. You can really see it in who they are as a brand, how strong they are in who they are, why they're there, who they're serving, and constantly investing in that dynamic.
I love that. It's a great example. Lego is a very sustainable brand that we've all grown up with we would all buy for our kids, and we just have that sort of, it still feels front of mind.
Yeah.
And I loved the Oddbox example of saying, hey, we're thinking about doing this, send out an email to the customers. What do you think? Any other sort of very practical, small example of a company that you've seen just reconnect with their customers in maybe a light way that actually has a very strong impact?
It's also not just about going out there and finding answers. As I said before, it's about the sort of constant openness to the way you engage. And I think Starling do an incredible job. And you barely ever speak to anyone. But when you do speak to them, you speak to them via an app, via the app. And it's a very human conversation. I don't know if anyone's ever used Starling. It's an incredibly, for a banking app, something incredibly transactional, which I always find quite interesting in itself. You've got a very transactional product, but I personally feel a lot of loyalty to them because they just get the basic stuff done. And when it comes to problems, any sort of banking problem you may have, where you'd want to speak to a person, you go into that, you speak through the app, there is a person at the other end that you can have those conversations. That's another channel, if you like, through which they can gain insight into how people are tackling their problems, or how their problems have been tackled, the kind of challenges that it may have, what may or may not be working about the app. And, you know, and there you've got tech that's really enabling that insight, or gathering that insight, because you're able to scan those conversations and pick out where, you know, things. So I think it's, you know, it's not always just about the people themselves. It can be about the tech enabling that to happen. But I think as well, it's another example of a brand that has built in a way that's so easy to use, that so taps into the needs that I have as a consumer, and that channel itself helps them to understand on a regular basis, that feedback loop, get those answers, get those insights into it, and that, you know, that can go back into the business. So it's not, you know, it's a mixture of both going out there and asking questions, bringing people into the business to understand what they need, having the culture in place to kind of take that insight back. But it's also about the ongoing stuff. It's about the, you know, scanning conversations, ensuring that people aren't, you know, the business understands where, how things are going, where the problems may lie, and taking that back in.
Very powerful. I have a personal example that taps into this, actually. More so on the large brands getting back in touch with their customers. So I won an award that L'Oreal sponsored, and that then meant that I went and did an internship and a very short grad scheme at L'Oreal. But during my internship, part of the award was that I would go with the UK CEO of L'Oreal to go and do customer research, a customer research day, where we'd go into lots of different customers' homes, sit around their kitchen table with a whole range of products, and they would just like talk to us about how they use them, not knowing that we were from L'Oreal. The whole point was that it was like completely anonymous, and so you had the UK CEO of L'Oreal sat there, and they had no idea who they were. And so I thought that was a great example of a large brand actually like trying to get back in touch with the customer. Sadly, I think they then stopped doing it. I think he said after that day, I remember he said like, this hasn't been valuable enough. Like it's not a good use of my time. And I think it was sort of one of those things where they sort of knew it was the right thing to be done, but still had that short-term mindset. And so went into it not with an open mind and communication.
And I think that's sadly the truth across the board. I've heard that similar stories a number of times, where it makes for a nice story on its own. Oh, the UK CEO came and, you know, and went and sat in customer focus groups. But actually, you know, as you say, is it best use of it? Because they're constantly in the struggle between shareholder value and you know, and short-term gains and stuff that just seems frivolous. But actually continuing to invest in, you know, in being in those conversations, as I say, going back to sort of sitting in the hotel lobby, for example, watching where people are getting frustrated, watching where people are having an amazing time, seeing, you know, I was sitting in Pret earlier today, and Pret's an amazing example of a brand that's done over the years, kept very true to some basic principles of what makes them strong. And I think the sense of empowerment and sort of ownership, if you like, personal ownership with the, you know, with the store owners and with the franchisees, is makes for a very powerful experience in itself. I was just watching the guy who's running the store. Like he wasn't demanding that his team got out and mop the floor because it was raining, and you know, they were coming in with their wet umbrellas, etc. People were coming in with their wet umbrellas, and he was getting them up and doing it himself. And you could see he was rushing around, like keeping the store together. And the sense of pride and ownership in that can only come through a culture that's built through within a business like Pret, where the teams themselves are enabled to kind of create the experience that they want to create. And I think it comes through, the free coffee piece, where, you can give away a free coffee to a regular customer, you think they need it. And it's stuff like that, which it's really powerful stuff, which doesn't pay in the short term, doesn't feel like it pays in the short term, but it pays huge dividends for the longer term. But it's having the guts to keep steady on it. And when the bigger you get, the more risk there is attached to stuff like that. The more you've got on your plate, the more you forget about the important stuff, really, which is the stuff that's going to keep you going longer term. Like, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, that's the stuff that builds loyalty, builds connection with your customers and your employees, and keeps them coming back, keeps them telling others about you as well. And it's the stuff which doesn't pay, but it'll pay off.
It's just that extra level of care.
Yeah, it's what we would all do. I think that's the thing. This is, say, the simplicity in it is like, what would you do if it was your home, or if it was your brother or sister or best friend or partner or whatever it is, and leaving, and I think one of the sort of most important principles within, like, for recruitment, particularly in more people-led industries such as retail and hospitality and so forth, is hiring people that love people. And it's, if you look for that first, people that care, people that want to make other people feel good. And, that will, yes, they might, make sure that person's well looked after, but it'll also, more often than not, mean that they take care and attention to detail and thoughtfulness, that you wouldn't get if that person was just focused on, doing their job and getting that box ticked. You've got to be in the business of building relationships.
And so, how is it that a founder can think about taking their brand from maybe a more transactional place to a more human-centered place with this care and people focus?
We talk a lot about a human-centered mindset to everything you do. And I think it's about applying the principles of always thinking about, what does the other person need right now? We are, building a tech product, building a moment in that journey, or you're building a service experience. What does that journey typically look like? What are the moments of it? Go and walk that journey, like you do when you're, if you're building any tech product, like, you go through the process of navigating through that experience and looking at the way people are. And the important thing around that as well is by living through it, you'll also notice the things that perhaps you don't see from the other side, the things that frustrate you. And in thinking in that way, you can start to apply it to everything you're doing, and it, regardless of whether you're creating a piece of communication, or whether you're building a new product, or whether you're building a new website, whatever it may be, always going back to what is it that the other person needs right now. What is it perhaps you don't know that they don't know that they need, and using that as your starting point, and then growing from there. You've got to overlay that with who we are, and that's again about saying before about having a really good sense of self, because it's not just about jumping from left to right and going, oh, well, they need that, so we'll do that, or we'll build that. It's about how would we communicate right now? Because that's why they're in a relationship with us. This is why they want to, they want to potentially be buying. How do we continue to stay in that relationship with them? We've got to demonstrate a little bit about ourselves. That's why they're attracted to us, if you like. So making sure you've got the two pieces of the pie, so to speak. And then that's when you start to move beyond just a transaction. A transactional relationship is one that's very much ticks a box. It's a commodity. And I think when you look at, banking, for example, going back to what we were just saying, or, even foreign exchange platforms like TransferWise, for example, like incredibly transactional industries. They're like, how could you, years ago, we would never think that anyone was to feel any kind of loyalty or love for any brand that was a banking brand. They were there filling a need. And now, because those brands have really invested in understanding what people want and what they're not getting, plus also having a really strong sense of self. When you think of the Monzos of this world, like they know who they are and they're not going to try and be everything to everybody. And it's about bringing those two pieces together. And that's when you start, as we say, thinking in a human-centered way, in that you put the relationship at the heart, you know the other person really well, and you know yourself really well. And then you can start to bring the two together, if you like. Then you start to move beyond, yes, it is transactional. I'm not saying it's anything, but, it is a functional brand, but you can start to build it in a way that's much, much deeper and has a much stronger propensity for loyalty from the other person than perhaps any of the other brands that have gone before it.
So to clarify, we have this understanding of self and understanding of the customer. We then approach the relationship with this level of care as if they were our best friend, our parent, our sibling. And we then put ourselves in their shoes, going through the experience, asking the question, what do they need at this point? Or what do they maybe not know that they need at this point? What do we know is going to happen further down the line that we can help at this point potentially? Is that the sequence and order?
Yeah, I think it's a sort of constant ebb and flow between knowing yourself, knowing the other person, and then acting on it. And I think when you're looking to know the other person, it's about those sort of constant feedback loops. And so in terms of sort of sequence, if you like, there is sort of components to what you should always be doing. I think that's probably the best way to think about it. Always think, check yourself. Like, do we know who we are? Like, is that moved on? Has that been shaped? Has that been pushed and pulled a bit in the last few years? Probably we should sort of check in with ourselves. Do we know who we're in relationship with? Yeah, I think so. Have we got ways to kind of keep tabs on that? Yeah, we're good. Okay, well then let's keep doing that. Are we reacting to it? Are we responding to it? Are we innovating around it? Are we pushing our experience on as a result? Are people happy? Like, you've got to measure it, right? You've got to kind of check in with people. There are it's sort of a combination of those factors, if you like, that go into what is a kind of a long-term game of investing in yourself, them, and and iterating on that over time. So I would never say do it in this order, because that's when you get, that's you're gonna get the holy grail when you do it. So it's not about that. It's like making sure you got those bases covered and continuing to check in on them, and and push it forward.
And then you have these things that support this whole relationship, this symbiotic relationship, which are tech and data. But we spoke before about how tech and data have sort of been used still in a transactional way, and it's
Yeah.
sort of with purely efficiency in mind, as opposed to using tech and data to create a more rich experience and deepen the relationship. Instead, it sort of feels like we're moving further away from our customers.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful if we know how to use it in the right way. I think that's our mantra for all of us today, right? And I think we risk getting in kind of dangerous territory, particularly with data, and AI, when we are deploying it to the same ends that we used to be. So if you go back 20, 30 years longer, building brand was all about creating brand love. We talk a lot about brand love. It was about, push, massive advertising spend, built brands such as Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Levi's, and they were all built really through big brand cues. And there was a lot of heavy lifting done by, the product itself, the color, the logo, et cetera, et cetera. It was very much, they could be at arm's length because we didn't have the likes of social media back then. That's all changed. And we've got now this world, this symbiotic relationship. We're in this world where we've moved from creating brand love to one of brand help. And through that new symbiotic relationship, we should be investing in each other, as we've just been talking about. Data and AI as a tool can help us do that really, really well if we use it in the right way. And it can be something which we overlay onto all of the good stuff we're gathering about who we're in a relationship with, as I already talked about. And it can give us a really good sense of, some of the trends that we're seeing, scale up some of the stuff we're talking about, all of that good stuff. And yet, more often than not, it's used to achieve the same ends as it was back 20, 30 years ago, where brands are taking this data and they're using it to push. They're using it to, to create personalized communications or create advertising. It can be hyper targeted. We're getting in our faces, but are you really thinking about what we genuinely need right now? And this is where you quite often have situations where a brand will, grab your attention, sort of get into your world per se, and then not deliver. Do you really understand me? Do you really know this? And you may buy something through ads that you've seen on Instagram because they've gone, right, you are a target. You buy the thing and you get it. It's like, this is rubbish. It's not anything to do with what I actually. You're not delivering on my needs right now. You've just got into my life, but I don't want you in my life right now, anymore. And that's and this sort of short-termism, I feel, that's still happening, and it's hugely frustrating. It's wasteful beyond anything else. Like, why waste money on getting into people's faces? Just invest in the relationship. Yes, obviously, we're not saying don't advertise, but do it with thought. And your advertising much more effective if you really do understand that person, because then you're delivering communications that means something to people. Like, everything needs to have value. And I think this is poorly understood in my view, is that even advertising should have value. Like, it should like connect with me in some way. And the best advertisers know that. but it's also sort of symbolic of what we should be applying throughout all engagements with a brand, like this commitment to adding value to their life. And I think a lot of times, through advertising, they may or may not get there, and then it falls off. Like if the sort of adding value to your life falls away, and it's like I should spend time on making sure that product or that experience is one that means something to me. But yeah, going back to your point, I think data is and tech is poorly used. There's a quote. There's a stat from Twilio, the marketing and platform, that 41. There was a survey last year. 41% of people they surveyed said they were open to a brand, engaging with them if it was hyper personalized. Like, great. So, you're up for that. Like, fine, be my friend. But 57% of those that they interviewed were concerned, had security concerns. There's a complete disconnect. It's like, well, I want you in my life, but I don't really trust you in my life. There's this constant tension at the moment between brands going, yeah, look after me. Like I'm happy to take you into my world, but like, do it in a way that's genuine and like with real meaning and commitment. And I think this is the struggle that we see. We're open to that relationship, and we've set the rules around that in the last few years, but we're also very skeptical. We're increasingly skeptical. And this is the sort of the tricky ground that all brands have to navigate between the two. And I think it, as I say, like the way to start navigating that is to make sure that you're doing it by offering, like by making sure you're adding value to people's lives and what you're doing, and doing it in a way that means something for them, actually getting to know your customer and yourself and making those calls only when it makes sense rather than just pushing stuff out.
And I feel like this ties into the last point, which is growing together. Can you speak a bit more to what does that look like in practice?
There is a truism in the industry which you should never actually have to go through a rebrand, like a big old rebrand. Because if you've done your job right, then you should just be evolving. It should be tweaks. It should be, and I think that growing together has to be about constantly, it's like active listening, constantly listening and constantly checking in with yourself, and then moving on, be it in terms of the product you're offering, be it in terms of what you stand for. You grow up. This is the thing. I mean, again, we were chatting to a brand the other day, and they've been going now, I think, for 8 years. Huge success, e-com brand, huge success during the pandemic, and very cult status. Very much connected with and within the youth, and a very strong understanding of the customer. And we were chatting to them about the fact that they realized and they understood that as they've grown up, they've started to attract older customers as well. And yet they knew that they weren't appealing directly through the way they were and who they were as a brand to those older customers. But they were attracting them, and they were actually like, these guys, because as a brand, they were, they're a premium brand ultimately, but they weren't able to sort of grow into that premium status with the current customer core base, the core customer base that they had. And they had this challenge where they wanted to open up and grow up, if you like, to attract a slightly older customer base, but without alienating their existing customer base. And these are some of the constant challenges that so many brands go through, as they are, as they're evolving themselves as businesses, as they're growing, and they need to, they need to commercially to grow and expand. In this case, they had a really strong and close understanding of who their customer was and how their customer was changing. And it got them to come to this point. It was like, our brand doesn't relate to that anymore. our customer is evolving as who it is, and therefore we need to check in on who we are to make sure that we are not going to lose them again. Like, we're not going to lose this new customer base. And because, as I say, they were fundamentally a premium brand, it meant that ultimately, by opening up their brand to an older consumer, they were able to sort of shift their positioning as well to be a more premium brand, not quite such a raw brand per se, that they were. And I think that's an example of growing together. That's an example of, by having this kind of by being very close to who you're attracting, hearing that, understanding that, feeds into innovation, feeds into the way you communicate, how you communicate, but it also feeds into some of your bigger long-term plans as well about where you want to go, both in terms of your new markets, both geographically but also demographically as well.
I always love for the last bit of our conversation to focus more on you as a person and help whoever's listening connect more deeply with you. So shift gears slightly. And I would love to know about your favorite dog, Amber.
My favorite dog,
Amber.
Amber. You really did go into the depths of my past. Amber the talking dog. That's what she's known. She was known as. She was our childhood dog, and she was called the talking dog because we believed that she could talk, but she could talk with her eyebrows. And she had one of those faces which was so full of expression that that you could read everything. Felt like you could read everything she said or she was saying. And my parents always had dogs. We always had dogs when we were younger, but she really left a hole in our family when she passed on. And I think it was largely down to the fact that it felt like she was another human being within the family. It very much felt like that she had that role, and she was there with all of us through the biggest moments and the toughest times. So I'm constantly seeking to replace that gap in my life. And we met a dog the other day. It was a dog from a friend of ours that held a strong resemblance to Amber, and I was like, we need a dog, and we need one of those dogs because I want Amber back. And it's not massively practical in our lives right now, but that's next on my list.
What a beautiful story. I suppose it comes back to how communication is only 7% words.
Yeah.
Dogs can communicate very effectively.
Dogs can communicate very effectively, and in ways that you don't. I know we were talking about this before we turned the camera on. Like, it's not all about words, and I think that's probably the kind of the biggest takeaway from everything that we talk about as a business and we believe and we try and talk to our clients about. It's not, yes, words can help. Listening helps, of course, it's incredibly powerful, but it's all in the action. It's all in the stuff that you can't put into words, and you communicate and connect on a level that has to go beyond that, because you can't, you've got to act on it, and you've got to demonstrate the investment in that relationship. And I think, a dog, for example, is a perfect example because of the fact they can't speak, and they show their love and commitment through other ways. And it's, it can make you end up treating them like a human being.
Their love feels almost the most consistent out of anyone's love in a way. Dogs, you can be angry with them, and then next second they're just going to come and be like, please love me again. And you can I don't know, accidentally step on a foot or something, and you put them in pain, and then they'll come straight back to you again
Yeah,
and be
yeah, yeah.
like, "Oh, I still love you," and that like immediate forgiveness through an action is
Mm.
so powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that is why we have this such strong connection to pets, specifically dogs.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And so I love that there's such this strong memory attached with this connection. Connection is this thread that we both share throughout all of our lives. And your husband, Jan, was amazing. And well, he was amazingly complimentary and expressive about you. You told me about your engagement at Claridge's and creating that experience for you with the team at Claridge's,
Yeah.
who he then also said that they really understand how to create experiences
Yeah.
and how that then tied into your proposal and obviously a very defining part of your life, which is beautiful.
It was quite special. I always joke that he's never done anything quite incredible, so incredible since, before or since, but he really pulled it out of the bag at that point. Yeah, no, it was, and look, it's sort of, I don't know, I mean, I've worked in hospitality, so my career was brand consultancy. Then I went client side and was working in hospitality and sort of luxury hospitality, and then was independent, and then started building WePioneer. And I've always been drawn to hospitality because it, like, when done well, it is the sort of the truest form of really powerful human connection that can build a brand really successfully. And a brand in this case, such as Claridge's, which has got, you know, it's got so much history attached to it, and it's you know, that could really date it. But as a brand, and you know, and a lot of luxury hospitality brands do a really good job as well. It comes down to kind of really thinking about people, and really, you know, that's true service. It's not like silver service and done with the sort of frills and all the rest of it. It's like, what do these people actually really want? And it's moments like that for the engagement, which were, I don't know, did he tell you the story? Yeah. And it was done with so much character and so much warmth that, and I think, you know, when you have a wonderful experience, like obviously like that, but also just going to stay somewhere, we have a wonderful experience. Like, there's some wonderful hospitality brands, like the Pig, you know, for example, is fantastic. If you're ever lucky enough to go and stay at the Newt in Somerset, or not even going to stay, I mean, it's extraordinarily expensive, but like go and even have like lunch there or something. They always do it so well because it's very special, but it's very human. It's like, you'd never, like, the best luxury hospitality brands make you feel like you're the center of the world, not just through their words, but through their actions. And they never make you feel like you don't belong there. And I think for me, that's why I love the industry, because done right, it can make you feel like the most special person in their lives. And that's a very, very powerful thing.
Something else that Jan, your husband, mentioned was how in awe he was of your work ethic, and how he said he could never match it throughout your whole relationship. But he also said that you've got 3 kids, and he said that you give yourself quite a hard time with how much time you spend with your kids, even though he believes that you spend loads of time with your kids. This feels like it's the constant struggle of the parent entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I empathize with anyone who's going through the same, because when you have kids, like up to that point, you know, you are your world. I mean, that sounds a daft thing. And then you have a partner, and then you become, but you're also two independent but interdependent beings, right? And you have kids, and you, like, a massive part of you is just opened up, and you take them all in, and you aren't just yourself, you're them and, yourself. And it's this constant kind of battle between holding on to the bit that is still just yourself and what you want, because if you quash that completely, then you're no use to anyone. And I truly believe that. But also, another very big part of you are these kids, and you get a really deep sort of calling to want to dedicate as much time to them as possible. and it's a real back and forth, and I don't think society helps, by any stretch, like constantly sort of make, particularly as women, like, I would, be honest there, but sort of constantly making you second guess everything you do. Because are you meant to be focusing on your career? Are you meant to be spending more time with your kids? Am I meant to be managing both? And I think if you're, every entrepreneur is an incredibly different person. You can't not be. Like, you can't not be a grafter, I don't think, and not have something inside you that drives you. And that, and that is a very powerful thing that you can't ignore. But then your kids become this other very powerful thing that you can't and don't want to ignore either. So it's not easy, but then I think the thing that sort of gets me through it, without meaning to sound too dramatic, is stepping back and the simple exercise of thinking about what I have rather than thinking what I don't have, what I should be doing better. I'm trying to get better at that. Trying to get better at just going, stop. Like, I think the other thing about being an entrepreneur is everyone is, like, generally you're goal orientated. You're always thinking about the next thing. You're always thinking about making things better. And where do you want to be in 5 years? And, you're striving. And I think that's very challenging, to become the kind of person that just stops and looks around them and goes, that's all right. What I've got is pretty special. So I can be, I said this to Jan a few times, I'm the happiest I've ever been, without a shadow of a doubt. And I have a pretty happy childhood. I was very lucky and privileged in that respect. But I've got everything I want. And I think even when you have everything you want, you're constantly trying to work out if you've got it all in the right proportions. But that's half of being human, I guess.
What a beautiful way to close this incredible conversation. The last question is around connecting with an audience, with anything that you are challenged by. I would love to have the impact of this conversation last longer than today for you. And so if you imagine there's a group of incredible entrepreneurs, leaders, very proactive people listening in, what is something that you would love some help, support, insight with?
Probably the most challenging thing I find about building a business is building a business on my own. And, the early stages, I thought, I want a co-founder, but then actually I know with hindsight that it was the right thing to do, like, just not to rush into any relationship, because the wrong relationships are also just as bad as the right relationships. but it's the echo chamber is tough, like second guessing your own choices. And I like to be a decisive person, but it's difficult to be a decisive person when you're constantly second guessing yourself. So I don't know if there's a solution to it, but I would love to understand how other people as solo founders navigate that sort of challenge of being at the top, so to speak. And, and every leader, I think, finds it the same. I think, it's lonely at the top, right? But when you are kind of making it up, there is no blueprint. There is no one that came before me that I can look at and go, right, well, they did that thing, and so I'm going to do it slightly differently and learn from their mistakes. You are kind of chopping away at the jungle in front of you and trying to carve a path. That's the bit I love. Like, that is the creative part of building a business that I absolutely adore. But it's also, it's the most challenging bit, because if you're doing it on your own, you're constantly making decisions about things where, as I say, you're second guessing it. So, I think working with coaches is great. Communities are great. I'd love to understand other people's experiences and kind of tips and recommendations on how they thrive being a solo founder.
That's a brilliant ask, and I am very confident that lots of people listening would love to reach out to you and share their experiences. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing yours.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Perfect.